with Jim Dykstra of Alto, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now Mr. Dykstra, can you start by giving us a little bit of background on yourself? To begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
What year were you born?
Born in 1947.
Okay. And what did your family do for a living?
My family, my father's family, owned a wholesale distributorship here in Grand Rapids, and the whole Dykstra family worked there, started by his father, and it was a successful distributorship that specialized in dime store, hardware store, gift shop type of merchandise, and we were very successful for many years.
Okay, and how many kids were in your family?
There were 5 of us, I being the middle child, so the goofy one. So.
All right. Yeah, I always thought middle children were normal. Oh.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Where did you go to school?
I went through the entire, as my whole family did, Christian school system here in Grand Rapids. I went to Seymour for elementary, and then Grand Rapids Christian High for my high school experience.
Okay, and did you graduate from high school?
I did.
And what year?
In 1965.
Okay. And then what did you do once you got out of high school?
You pretty much were forced to go to college because of the draft. So you needed a deferment, which was, for me, would have been because of my physical. I was 1A, and so you went to college, and you had to carry a full-time load, a full load, and you had to keep your grade point above a certain level. I didn't. Consequently, it was more the load I was taking than the grade point, and the school system was bound to report daily to the Selective Service Board as to your status.
All right.
And
what college were you in?
I went to Grand Rapids, then Grand Rapids Junior College or Grand Rapids Community College, and I dropped one class that dropped me below. It was either a choice of going below the watermark for grade point or for time. I figured I'd save the grade point at that time because it was a big accounting class that I got behind in, and it's hard to make it up. So. Consequently, because I was not a full-time student, I was drafted that summer.
You mentioned that you were, so what did you sort of know about sort of the Army or Vietnam or whatever at that time? Because it's still fairly early in the larger conflict. From what directions were you getting messages saying you don't want to go in the military?
Other than it was counter to my goals, although I didn't have clear goals at that point in my life. I was just kind of stumbling through life and living a very nice, comfortable life, and not as politically aware as probably I should have been, just simply because it was so far away. It had nothing really to do with me.
Right. And
there was the push at that time to, if drafted, go to Canada and, nothing, just start your life over again in Canada. That wasn't never an option for me, just never something I even considered. But I knew no people who chose that option, but it probably basically wasn't as politically aware as if I had been maybe on a big campus,
Yeah. And it's
coming
still,
from.
Yeah. And this is still sort of early enough. I mean, it's really probably 68 tends to be the watershed for a lot of the really dramatic anti-war stuff. And before that, you've got some of it, not quite at the same level, and maybe not so much in Grand Rapids or someplace like that.
Well, certainly the national news was reporting things, but this was 66, 67. There weren't. I mean, there was action going on, but it just didn't seem to be as bad a thing as it was.
Right.
And so I just didn't pay a lot of attention to it.
So for you, it was really just, it would be kind of, it would be taking out of what it was that you wanted to be doing otherwise, or where you thought you'd be going, and so you just kind of rather not do it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And when I did get my draft notice, there was no turning back. I mean, you are required to be there. And I kind of resolved myself, I'll give them 2 years. Okay, this is what I need to do, and this is my role. So I decided to do it.
All right. Now, where do they send, what's the process? Where do they send you to, where do you report to? Where do you go for basic training then?
All right, we were originally, well, first you go for your physical to see if you're physically able to be in the military. And I kind of smiled through the whole thing because I was told that the height limit was 6'4", and I, being 6'6", a nice night in Detroit, I'll walk through the building in my underwear and they'll send me home. Contrary to, I guess somewhere along the line that had been changed to 6'6". So I was classified as 1A, which is able to go into the military physically. And from then I got my letter to report to the bus station. And from there we went to Detroit, got on a train to Fort Knox, Kentucky, did my basic training in July in Kentucky, which I don't suggest anyone do. And from there, strictly a draftee. They tried very hard to get me to sign up and go to a school. We guarantee you won't do this, that, and the next thing. And I said, no, I had seen enough of military life then, and that was only weeks in, that I thought, well, I'll just give them my 2 years as I said I would. And so I just went as a draftee. 90% of those ended up in the infantry.
Right. Okay. Describe a little bit that time down there at Fort Knox in basic training. What kind of reception do you get when you get there, and then what happens over those weeks?
To me, not being in the best physical shape, that was the challenge of it. Certainly not the mental part of it. That was, nothing. And interestingly enough, I was in a platoon of draftees from the Grand Rapids area, and our average schooling was around 19 years. So we had college graduates, we had guys working on their masters, we had, and I knew some of them, and we were really some very intelligent fellas in there. So we kind of breezed right through as far as the tests that they give you and such. We were smoking cigarettes before anybody had even gotten past the first page. But the physical part of it for me was the challenge, and I got to admit I did get into some best physical shape of my life, but it took a lot of struggle, and they always hold over your head that you're going to the fat farm, which was put you back a few weeks, which you just can't imagine, because number one, you lose all the friendships that you've established, and you just don't want that stigma. But a lot of the challenges they give to you, I couldn't do because I'm so tall, and like the monkey bars. You get a little guy, he just swings across them like nothing, but I can walk, and so I had to hold my legs up and my arms all at the same time, and that was a challenge. The physical part of it was a challenge, and I guess after I made the first mile run, the first morning, they get you up and you run a mile. I didn't think I'd make it, but I made it, which told me, hey, I can do this. So I did make it through in regular time and graduated with my company.
Okay. Now, what about the military discipline side of things? Was there a lot of emphasis on that?
No, not really. That was pretty basic stuff, But then again, I lived in a platoon with fellows from my same neighborhood, knew a lot about each other's values, and so we got along very well. But the military life, although it didn't appeal to me, it was not a challenge by any means.
Okay. So you were comfortable just following orders and doing what they told you to do?
Very much so, yeah.
And if you,
I challenged a lot of times the way it was, is it necessary to stand in my face and scream at me? But, I did get the point, but then again, there were people where it was necessary to stand in their face and tell them to do things. So it was interesting.
Okay. So you actually had drill sergeants standing in your face and screaming at you?
Oh,
and
very much
kind
so,
of thing.
yeah.
And did you sort of get where they were coming from or what they were doing, so you just put up with it, or?
Pretty much just put up with it, and they were in charge. I was always, adults are, in charge type of a upbringing. So, and I consider them the adults. They're the ones that had the rank, and yeah. But realistically, they were just guys doing a job.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they were.
All right.
And well, very fortunate. I had some very good, training sergeants.
Mm-hmm. All right. So how long was the basic training? 6 weeks, 8?
No, I think it was 8 to 10 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, did you get any advanced training after that, or did they just ship you off?
Well, your final day, you were handed your orders. After you've gone through a little graduation ceremony, you're handed your orders. Excuse me. I opened mine thinking I would be going to the infantry, and it didn't say infantry. You have this thing called an MOS, which is your basic job, and it's given a number and a 95B10, and I did not know what that was. And because I signed up for nothing. I mean, I was strictly a draftee. So I went to my sergeant and I asked him what a 95B10 was. He said, I think it's a cook. I said, well, okay, I could be a cook. That would be fine. It's good. And so I thought I was a cook for a couple of days. And then it came out that it was MP school, which was given at that time at Fort Gordon, Georgia, which is just outside of Augusta, Georgia. I was given a leave. I went home for 10 days, 2 weeks. My mother and girlfriend showed up for graduation thinking I was going to get on a bus and go to, everyone went to Fort Polk, Louisiana at that time. And, but I didn't. I went home with them. And went back and went to Georgia and MP school, military police school.
All right, now describe a little bit what that was like.
I don't have a lot of recollection of that. It was just, I kind of stumbled through that, and I was very fortunate and very pleased to be there because, certainly this is not, and it was interesting. I found it very interesting as far as the military code of justice, that type of thing. We had a lot of classes on that, and they were very simple, breezed through them, nothing really difficult about them, and I don't have a lot of recollection of that time down there. I know I caught the crabs, and I believe it was, and from a little, I don't know, why do I remember that? But it's just a little side thing, and I never knew what that was. So I never dealt with that in my life. So that was, I don't know why I remember that.
Well, it may have been annoying at the time.
Well, it's extremely. Something was living on me. I didn't like it. It was probably one more indoctrination into military life.
And then did you have to get deloused or something like that?
I don't remember how it was handled, but I'm sure I went on what they called sick call, and I got an issue. Of course, everybody pointed and stared, and, because there was. I'm sure it came from my mattress or my blankets or something, but it wasn't from any other activities. So it was just.
Yeah. Now let's see. Do you remember anything physically about the base? I mean, how does that compare to Fort Knox?
It was. I remember the awful. We stayed in old World War II barracks, which was Quonset huts, if you will, and they were heated with coal. And I can still remember in the morning you're mustered out, and you stand in what they call the company street, and you get in your formation. And I just can remember the heavy mist of Georgia in the fall, and then the coal smoke adding to that, and it just hung there. Why? It's just a recollection I have, and everyone was. Coughing up these disgusting, things from their lungs. It's just, again, Probably not the most fun I had in the military, but
sound like it.
that is another recollection I have of Georgia. I remember it as being very dry. We didn't do a lot of hiking. And they always kept telling us to beware of the snakes, which I'd never been from Michigan. You don't worry about snakes that bite you and hurt you. They had some kind of a snake down there called a coral snake, which I guess is not anything you want to deal with. So, but again, it just didn't stick too well.
About how long were you down there?
That is, I believe, another 8-week training, 8 to 10 weeks.
All right. And then where do you go after that?
From there, I was assigned to White Sands Proving Grounds, which is in New Mexico. And when I arrived there in Las Cruces, New Mexico, it was just outside of that. I checked in, and they assigned me to a place called Rhodes Canyon, which is in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely the most interesting place. It is at the foothills of Superstition Mountains. This is a top secret area. We were probably 8 of us, lived out there in a ranch style home. We had a cook, a sergeant who was just waiting to get out, and 4, 5, 6 of us MPs. And there we lived, and we were security. We had no idea what we were securing against. And this is the most desolate place on earth. And if you can imagine, this is where they blew off the first atomic bomb. This is where Trinity Site is, just a little bit north of where we lived. And so you got to know how desolate this place is if you can, blow off an atomic bomb there and not have any destruction. So our job was security. And there was a road that went up or north from the southern base, went north up into the proving grounds or the missile range. And there was one that went from east to west, but not over the mountains. You couldn't go over the mountains. You had to go either a northern route or southern route because the military installation was in between. Right. And our job was to be at checkpoints, little phone booths, if you will, in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and that's where we sat. And you could see a car coming 5 miles away. That's how flat it was. But most of the time you were asleep because somebody could have been 100 yards away, and the whole infantry division could have crossed, and you would have never have seen them because they might have been in a valley or a wash or something. But I enjoyed it. It was very, very interesting.
So how did you spend your time when you were out there on guard duty?
Well, you were working 7 days a week, 12-hour days. And if it rained, everything turns to mud. So they can't relieve you. So they would just fly a helicopter over and throw you down some food. And there you'd be. I mean, you had a phone, but most of the time it didn't work because it was a landline that was just laid on the ground. And then back, if you were off duty, you were, sleeping or playing cards. That was it. And there was only 6 or 8 of us there. And the sergeant could have cared less what we did. So we would go to town and buy our own ammunition for our 45s because you couldn't, if you fired one of their bullets, you better have a dead person with you because, you don't shoot their ammo. Right. So we bought our own. And so we would do a lot of target shooting and that type of thing with our own, and then clean our guns and put their ammo back in it, which was bright green because it had never been used. I think it was from World War II. But we did carry loaded sidearms. And but in the probably year that I was there, I don't think I ever encountered anyone that I had to ask them what they were doing there and turn them around. Most of the time they were lost tourists. So, no one with, bad intentions. Now, in the proving grounds were missiles that had impacted and within them, I guess there were secret devices that they were working on for guidance and that type of thing. And all along the proving grounds, or the test site, were these, they look like observation, well, like telescopes, and they were, but they were cameras that would take a picture of the missiles as they went up and as they impacted the whole time. And it was very interesting, but we were not a part of that. I mean, that was for the scientists.
Right. Now, did you get sort of time off beyond those, your 12 hours off?
Very, very, very little. And this is when Vietnam was ramping up. So I was perfectly happy there. I mean, this was a very safe, interesting place to live. And I would have gladly done all my time there. And once I'd gone past a year left in the military, you sort of breathe a sigh of relief, like, oh boy, they don't send you to Vietnam with less than a year to go. Well, that's another false rumor. So, because I eventually was sent with only 10 months left of service.
Now, during the time that you were there in New Mexico, did the other men there rotate out, or did they mostly stay, or?
We were pretty much the same group. No one really rotated out. I was probably one of the very first to go. Why? I don't know. No, I shouldn't say that. I guess maybe 3 or 4 of us got orders at the same time to go.
Now, were most of them other new recruits, or were some of them people who'd been in the Army a lot longer?
No, most of us were just in for a short time.
Okay.
This was our first duty station.
All right. So what was your reaction when you got the orders that told you were going to Vietnam? Or how did you find out you were going to Vietnam?
I was called to the lieutenant's office because I came back late from leave, and I thought he was going to talk to me about it. And as he did, because he was very upset that I showed up, because he was from Michigan, and if I'd have been one more day late, he could have gone home to look for me. So he was a little upset that I did show up. But he chewed me out for being late, and I said, oh well. And he said, but I have bad news, and he handed me, my orders for Vietnam, which included another 2-week leave. So basically, I just got back from a leave, and I checked out and went back home for another, and then went to Vietnam from there.
Okay. Now, how did they physically get you out to Vietnam?
I flew from Grand Rapids to Fort Lewis, Washington. And there was a Fort Lewis was a very large place, so basically we were in these 2-story old, again, I'm sure, World War II type billets, and we were just waiting time to load onto an airplane, and we flew we flew from Fort Lewis, Washington to Alaska and took on fuel, and then we flew to Japan and then into Cam Ranh Bay.
All right. Now, were you on a military aircraft?
No, it was a commercial airline, United, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Was it chartered by the military?
I'm sure it was a charter. Yeah, it was a charter flight.
But you had stewardesses and things like that?
Yeah, we actually did. Yeah. They weren't real helpful, but yeah, we did have stewardesses, and so yeah,
all right.
That part of it was all right.
Okay. Now, what do you remember about sort of arriving in Vietnam? You get into Cam Ranh?
Came into Cam Ranh Bay, and were just put up in some place awaiting further assignment. It was, I guess it was the heat. As soon as they opened the doors of the airplane, it was like somebody punching in the nose. It was really oppressive. And, but again, I don't remember much about Cam Ranh Bay. I don't think I spent more than 1 night there. Mm-hmm. And I was assigned to go to Long Binh, which is in the south of Vietnam, and we were loaded onto a C-130 at that point, which flew us down to an air base close to there.
All right. and then landing there, how do they get you out to where you're stationed? Or what happens once you get there?
Well, as it turns out, part of that became my duty. I cannot remember the name of that air base at Benoit. Oh, Benoit.
Well, there you go.
All right, excuse me, Benoit Air Base, and which was a large facility, very large Air Force facility, and we were the C-130 landed, and we were met by a bus. And C-130 was an interesting flight because you sit on the floor on your duffel bag, and you fly at treetop heights. You don't, it didn't go to altitude, and and you can I was in a position to look out the window, and I'm thinking, oh boy, because this is really the first time I've only seen military installations to this point, so this is the first time I see the countryside, and I wasn't impressed. I thought, oh boy, what have I done now? And so you fly at treetop level, which is, an interesting way to travel. And we arrived at no problems at Benoit Air Base, and we were put on buses and brought to the 90th replacement depot, which was a huge replacement depot on Long Binh. Mm-hmm. But the drive from Benoit Air Base to Long Binh is about 8 or 9 miles through the city and countryside of Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And so there you get to see the actual countryside of the country and start to realize the experience that was about to unfold.
Now, what do you mean by that? What do you
Well,
see
a
there?
third world country. A little Dutch boy from Grand Rapids has never seen a third world country where I can still remember vividly watching a man plow a field with a oxen or a water buffalo, I believe it was, and in the sanitation, that issue was far below anything. Well, yeah, you just didn't deal with that, That was an eye opener, and so it just was a beginning of what was to come. Okay. Just, oh boy, here we are.
All right. And then where are they taking you to?
They're taking me to the 90th replacement depot, right, which is a huge facility where it's just basically bunks in a room, and you are given a place to stay until such time as you're assigned to a unit.
And how long did that take?
Oh, I don't even think I spent the night there. I think, as I remember, we arrived probably early morning and or mid-morning, and I think by that afternoon I was on a Jeep going to my assignment, which was a military police company based on Long Binh.
Okay. All right. And then what are your duties there?
Well, that's where it really gets interesting. I arrived at what was the 557 MP company on Long Binh, and I arrived and checked in, and you turn in your paperwork and meet the first sergeant, and you're given a platoon and pointed in the right direction. So you go and stake out a bunk and meet the other people in the platoon if they're around, and come to find out that we're assigned to the prison, which is just down the street or up the street from the prison. I did see it as I drove by it. Now, typically, military prisons there is a separate MOS for a confinement specialist, which is a prison guard, for lack of another term, and I was not that. I was what's called a road patrol, or that was what I was trained to do. But because of the riot that they had in there, they were very short of people. Several guards were injured and moved out. So consequently, our company was asked to supply people for the prison, and I was one of those people. along with anybody else who arrived with me that day. As I remember, there were 4 or 5 of us that arrived that day. And they also were assigned to the Long Binh Stockade.
Okay. Describe the physical facility
Of my billets or
of the prison.
Well, from what I originally saw, it's simply a highly fenced with concertina wire. All stockades are double wired. In other words, you have one set of fences and then another set behind, and razor wire across the top. And every 50 yards or so, a turret or a guard post up in the air, elevated on every corner, and probably one in each in the middle. And it also had a tarp strung, or some type of a thing that didn't allow you to see in, strung all the way around the outside of it. And that was my first, but I didn't have any idea I was going there, so I didn't pay any attention. Eventually, once inside, the place was ruined because they had a riot, and several of the buildings had been burned to the ground. The place was in chaos, and they were still assessing the situation when I arrived, and basically all we did was just make sure nobody got out. We didn't do any work, really. We just made sure no one escaped from the facility. That was our job.
Okay. Do you have a sense of how many prisoners were there at the time?
At its height, it was probably designed for maybe 300, and I think at its height it had over 700. So they were grossly overcrowded, and the reason for the riot, in my understanding, and was it was a race issue that came up during because everyone was, this was a time when race was becoming a strong issue in the military, in the country, civil rights and all that. And during the time I was in basic training was when Detroit had their riot, and we were put on alert for that, but never called up. So there were a lot of things going on in the military that didn't have anything to do with the war, other than so the facility itself was pretty much in a shambles, and the authorities were just trying to decide what to do.
Okay. How were they housing the prisoners at that point?
The prisoners were housed. The nonviolent prisoners were taken care of. They were in a separate compound. They had, I think they were intense, and their daily life was pretty normal. They were taken out on work details, and work details primarily were burning the human waste, as well as sandbagging, because everything had to be sandbagged. So we used prisoners for that, and guards would take out 6 or 8, 10 prisoners at a time on a work detail for whatever purpose they were given. So their life went on pretty normal. That was normal prison life, other than the fact that they didn't have any really good facilities, and other than a tent, which really wasn't that bad. But then there were there was a group of about 10 to 15, as I remember it, who were, we call it running wild. They were in another section of the prison, and they were simply living off the earth. And they had gone, well, as we called it, native. They were wearing loincloths and all different forms of garb that you just couldn't, who knew what they were going to come up with next. And this was Caucasian as well as blacks. It was a mixed group, but they were extremely violent and very dangerous people, and they were on their own in a fenced-in area. We had cornered them in an area, and pretty much we're just letting them. We threw their food in full cartons of C rations over the fence. We didn't even open the door, And I still remember that, throwing the things over the fence. And, that's a 10-foot fence. We had to do some serious heaving to get them over. And, but that's, again, that was our orders to make sure they didn't escape. This group was staying there. Now, many of them were wanted for instigating the riot, and they knew they were in some serious issues. And so human life was not anything they worried about.
And did they fight with each other, or did they?
Oh, often, yeah. There was a lot of, they had to have bonfires at night and actually burning their own facilities, which really kind of counterintuitive, but not very smart. And, and they would 55-gallon drums, and they'd be banging on the drums. And I mean, it was really native. It was really different. And our job was to sit on folding chairs and make sure they didn't get away, knowing that there would be a reckoning coming, but they didn't know how or what to do. So,
how long did that situation go on?
weeks at a time. And then the military brought in probably one of the most military men I've ever met, I've seen in the Army. I've seen a lot of, but this man was a lieutenant colonel that had come up through the ranks. He was an older gentleman. I believe his last name was Johnson, Colonel Johnson. And he walked ramrod straight, butch haircut, a pipe in his mouth almost constantly, a meerschaum pipe, I remember that. He was just, again, one of the most military men I'd ever seen. Demanded respect, even from his guards. I mean, if he walked by, and he was always walking by, he was always around, you snapped to attention, you saluted him, just like a recruit in basic training, and he would always return your salute and ask you to carry on. But he was something. But he was sent by General Westmoreland to figure out something to do with this thing. And he walked around for better than 10 days. I remember sitting there on the chair looking, oh, here he comes, And he just, how's it going, boys? That would be all he'd have to say. And then one day, he stepped out of his office, which was right behind us, and he said, go get your riot gear. Which meant flak jackets, rifles, no ammo, but with fixed bayonets and gas masks. So we all went back to what we call the company area, where we kept that equipment, and got the equipment, and came back. And in basic training for MP school, you learn skirmish lines, military, where you fix bayonets, you stand in a line, and you half step. And you have a pointed bayonet right out in front of you. And if somebody runs into it, well, they get stuck. So if no one breaks rank, it is extremely effective. So this is what we did, and this is how we went after these. We went into the compound. First, we gassed them with CS gas for quite some time, which were little baseball-sized grenades that we would throw in there, and they would. And CS gas is just a miserable gas. Oh, I should preface this by saying the colonel had brought in shipping containers, what were called connexes, and lined them up, put a tent over top of them, and then he had the engineers come in and cut slats. So we had cells. He decided that was the way to go. So we had cells for these people to be put in. And then we went and rounded them up. And they kicked and screamed, and many of them got stabbed. And it was just bedlam for quite some time. And as you're being spit on, and of course we were kind of taking our retribution of weeks and weeks of abuse by them, throwing urine on us as we walked between the fences and all other sorts of things. And so, as we threw them in a cell, we maybe throw a CS grenade right behind them, just to say, we're in charge now. That's basically was what we were saying. We're in charge. And we ran, I can still remember it, we ran a chain all the way down. I mean, there were at least 15 cells on a side, and we ran a chain down through the handles with a padlock on one end, and nobody got out for a day and a half. And they're in there half naked, covered with CS gas, so it had to be miserable. So they came out of there like puppies to go to their first shower to get clean, and they hadn't had a shower in weeks and weeks before that. So we kind of established ourselves as the people in charge. But yeah, we still had resistance, but that was the aftermath of the riot. That's how we got control.
After that, then, did you keep them in these improvised cells?
Yes,
Okay.
very much so. Until such time as the engineers could come in, clean up different places, and rebuild permanent facilities. And it was not a bad place to go if you were just screwed up in your company. And some of the infractions that people were there for, well, of course, you had murder, you had cowardice, you had befriending the enemy. Many of these people were AWOL, deserters, living on the land with Vietnamese families, Vietnamese homes, everything. And they were caught and they were brought to justice. And this is where we held them until such time. They had, the reason they held them there was because the trial was held in the country, because that's where your witnesses and that type of thing were. And if convicted, they were then, for anything more than 6 months, they were brought to Leavenworth. They had prison flights that would bring them right to Leavenworth. And always tried to get on one of those and never was able to, just for a chance to go back to the States. But I was never chosen. Usually it was guys that were going back and they would, you know, assign them to a prisoner and take them back. But people have always asked me, well, why did they keep those people there? Well, that's where they had to have their trial, because that's where the witnesses were and that type of thing. So they never. But again, one of the things that, in talking about this in later years after coming home, people don't stop and think, well, yeah, there were U.S. soldiers that killed people. I mean, this is, they always thought I was a guard for Vietnamese, you know, prisoners of war. I said, no, these were American prisoners. What are they doing in jail? Well, they screw up too. Right. I mean, many of them were, we have a term, Vietnamese term, or a military term called fragging. That happened a lot more than was ever reported. And you would have these men in the prison. And they were not, I've always said, in retrospect and a little more life experience behind me, these were people that were seriously mentally ill people. That had they not been in that facility, had it not been 1968 or 67, 68, they would never have made it past the different testing and such that it was necessary to be in the military. But pretty much you had a pulse. You were drafted without and these people were just seriously ill, mentally ill people that happened to be in the military.
So it wasn't as if Vietnam had turned them into monsters. They were already people
I think
with
it gave them
issues.
the opportunity, with the weapons and all the different things that were at their disposal, to be a bad person. But they were predisposed for it to begin with. I've always, in retrospect, I wasn't thinking that way as a 21-year-old kid, but in retrospect, I'm sure these people would have been in federal prison had they not been in a military prison.
All right. Now, once you got that particularly violent group under control, so after that first month or so that you're there, did your life there settle into a certain sort of routine, or
it did become quite routine, but you always were in fear. You walked through those front doors, you were in fear. You had no weapon. As a guard, you carried a nightstick, which was, that's it. That's all you were allowed to have. You couldn't certainly bring a weapon into the prison. And and as we established order, and as they built facilities, and they built a maximum security area with better cells than a shipping container. They actually had a bench in them. And so we moved those over there. Your medium security and your light security, life went on for them. I mean, they were going off on their work details, coming back, they were just waiting to get out. Mm-hmm. And if they made no trouble, they were out in half the time. And they were on their way back and let their first sergeants deal with them. Because we didn't want the population to get as high as it did at one point in time, and that was one of the reasons for the riot, is the close quarters everybody was in.
When the riot took place, was it prisoners initially fighting each other, or did they turn out and attack the guards, or just
It was racially motivated, and it was sort of, I was not there for that, but in talking to people who were, it grew. And it was black against whites, and then as the cadre, or as the people, or you were so outnumbered, mm-hmm. it was as you tried to establish order, I guess that's when it turned ugly, and some people were injured. One killed, one guard was killed, several injured. The commander of the facility at that time was also injured. But he wasn't very, they had bunks because of the overcrowding. They had bunks. And one of the weapons was the bunk risers from the bottom to the top, which was a piece of steel about this long. Well, all they had to do was lift off the top bunk, take that. Well, they had a much better club than the guards had. We had a nightstick, which would crack in no time. And I broke several of them. And so that's what they used. That was their weapon, primarily. And then all the other assorted weaponry that you find in prisons that the people make up, like the razor blade in the toothbrush end and that type of thing. But these people were given. They had cigarettes, they had lighters, they had matches, they had wasn't really very thought out at all. Mm-hmm. And that's how the fires got started, and that's how everything got burned, and it was just bedlam. I understand. I was not there for it.
Right. Okay. Tell me a little bit about the company you were in. What did you know or learn about the men you were serving alongside?
They were some really wonderful people. I stay in contact with several of them. We all don't remember our guard duties or our stockade duty. Your goal was to get out of there. I mean, some way, somehow, find a way to get out of there. I mean, and there was another platoon in our company who were we called them pretty boys, were guys that guarded at the USAV headquarters, which was the headquarters. This is where all the generals and colonels and all of them, where they had their offices. It was a very stately place. And these guys were like Pentagon. They wore the little scarves and, the starched everything. And they were another platoon, but they would ride over there in their shiny Jeeps and just stand guard and look good. Their helmets just polished and shining. So actually, nobody really wanted to do that because that was pretty lowly duty, but it certainly was a much safer duty because you were in danger at all times in the prison. You have someone coming up behind you and just, starting something or beating you, or several people getting on it. I mean, you just never knew what was going to happen inside those walls. Mm-hmm. It was very unstable.
So would that happen to you? Would people try to jump you, or?
I personally did not get hurt or jumped, but it certainly could have happened at any time. When you would have incoming rounds, or even a air raid rehearsal, the prisoners got in the bunkers. The guards stood outside, which we always thought was unequal, but that was they're the ones that got in the trenches, or the dug protection that we had there. And we did take incoming rounds of rockets and things on Long Binh, which were just shot willy-nilly, but you never knew where they were going to land. They would just shoot them and run. So we did take incoming rounds, but then the air raid siren would go off and everybody would get in the bunkers, and the MPs had to stand outside, which I didn't like very much. That was.
Now, did those incoming rounds ever hit anything?
They would occasionally hit something, but most of them fell, harmlessly in fields or different places, or didn't explode or something. And then you'd have the reactionary forces go out and try to find where they shot them, but those people were long gone. So it was a very hostile area outside of Long Binh itself.
Has Long Binh close to Saigon? Is that in that large general
It's about
area?
12 miles southwest.
And so there is sort of open country between you and the city.
Quite a bit. Oh, yes.
Okay. Now, did you get off the base much at all?
When I was in the Stockade, no. I pretty much, my life was Stockade, sleep, and go to the PX, and come back and devour whatever I was able to buy, and sleep some more, and then go to work. So again, that was a 7-day-a-week, 12-hour-a-day type of job.
Okay.
There was very little off time.
Okay. And then how long did you have that duty?
I was in the Stockade, I think I lasted longer than anybody who was originally assigned there. And I went, only because I ended up as a 21-year-old Grand Rapids boy as NCOIC, which is non-commissioned officer in charge, of maximum security, because I had Psych 101 in college. I was the highest educated guard that the psychiatrist had, and that's why he made me in charge of maximum security, which was pretty awful. I mean, the conditions were terrible, but again, it was still better than taking people out on work details. So I did, I went with it. Again, I was there for 2 years. That was it. Mm-hmm. But I did not want to get hurt. So anyway, I went to I had my R&R time, which is about 5 to 6 months in, you get an R&R. And on the way out the door to go to that, I stopped and talked to, it was a young psychiatrist who had an office there. I noticed he was in his office, and I stuck my head in, and I said, do your best to get me out of this place. I can't take it. And the next thing you know, I'm going to hurt one, and I'm going to be in here. And he looked at me and said, I'll see what I can do. But you have lasted longer than anybody, and I appreciate it. By this time, the military had reacted, and we're bringing in professional confinement people. Mm-hmm. So yes, there were other people to take my place, and I guess he was able to find somebody that could take over. And when I got back from R&R, I had orders out of there. And the other assignment that my company had was road patrol, which was the security of the city of Benoit and around the air base. And that's what I started to do. Okay.
Now, where did you go for R&R?
Hong Kong.
Okay. What was that like?
Oh, that was an amazing experience. I had a friend, also a Grand Rapidian, who I met on the airplane as we were leaving, and he was also an MP. I'd never met him before. We're still friends, and we both went to Hong Kong. And at that time, I certainly haven't been back, but I don't know, maybe each of us had a couple $100 of military scrip, which they turned into this wad of cash. It was just Hong Kong dollars, they call it. And they were just, we felt like high rollers. We were really something. So we paid our hotel bill, so we didn't run out of money. So we would have a place to stay. We stayed in a nice hotel on the Kowloon side. Officers stayed on the Hong Kong side. We stayed on Kowloon. I don't know. Didn't know where we were going anyway. It didn't really matter. So we paid our bill up for the time we were going to be there, so we didn't run out of money. And we still had just stacks of money. And I remember getting a suit coat, pants, couple of shirts made in a couple of hours. They delivered it to my hotel room for, I don't know what I paid. It had to be just like $10. I mean, it was just nuts. So I had a nice civilian outfit to wear, and so I just remember it was a very interesting time. I'm not going any further.
Okay, that's fine. Then you get back again. Now, was it hard to get back on the plane to go back to Vietnam?
No, just again, your duty, back to duty, and so okay, this was great. I had a wonderful time. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Now I'm back. Now I got to go back to and put in, because by that time, you can sort of see the end. Mm-hmm. And okay, well, we'll go and finish this out. And then when I arrived back, the first sergeant said, "I got something for you," which were orders out of the prison and back or into my company. It was the same company and same billet and everything, but different job.
Okay. Before we kind of move out of the prison stockade stuff, did you get much of a chance to get to know any of the prisoners themselves? Did you have much by way of conversations with them, or did you really kind of keep your distance?
No, I cannot remember one single personal relationship I ever made. In other words, it was do this, do that, get back in your cell.
And I guess a lot of the time you were dealing with the maximum security ones.
I dealt with maximum security, and they were only allowed out like an hour a day, and we had a very small area for them to exercise and get sun. And feeding them was, a tray under the door kind of a thing.
Yeah. You had also mentioned that the maximum security duty was sort of preferable to taking people out on work details. What made the work details difficult?
Well, number one, you were out in the sun as well, and it's beastly hot there and very, very humid. You had to deal with, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. You were armed with a shotgun, sawed-off shotgun. Most of them aren't going to run, but you never know. And I just couldn't bear the thought of leveling down on a guy just, who's there maybe for smoking marijuana or having marijuana in his possession or something like that. You certainly wouldn't shoot him. I don't, I guess it was more look what I got kind of a thing. And they were assigned to, I remember sandbagging, constantly sandbagging. Putting sandbags around the different, as the place built, more hooches went up, more buildings went up, then they had to be sandbagged. And then we used prison labor for that. Whereas any other place in the country, they would use native, or they use Vietnamese for that type of work, who are much more suited for the, the weather. Yeah. And, you give them a break every couple hours, and that was it.
Right. Did you have any Vietnamese who worked at the prison, or all Americans for that?
No, they were not allowed in the prison. Now they, again, were part of our mess, our company mess hall. They did the dishes and that type of thing. We did not use prisoners for that because we didn't want them touching our food, and we didn't want them around our food. Yet we let the Vietnamese in. Go figure. I don't understand that, but.
All right. And then, so are you sort of billeted sort of outside of the stockade area, sort of in a separate place?
Yes.
Or in the main base?
Yeah, you were not, you were in a separate area that there were several. We had an infantry company across the street. The Long Binh Hospital was directly across the street, and there we'd have to deal with, helicopters coming in constantly, because that was a main hospital in Vietnam.
Right. And did you have much contact with people in the other units who were in the base, or did you pretty much stay with your own company?
No, we pretty much, now we went over and made friends with the nurses. There was a tent of nurses, so we went over there and made friends with them. And we had people that, now they didn't leave the area very much. They were pretty much stayed in their hospital, or stayed on Long Binh. But we were out in the country, so if they had requests, we would oftentimes try to find the materials for them and get them.
Okay, so once you were on the road patrol duty.
Right, you were in the city, right. Yes.
Okay, so describe a little bit what that was like.
Daytime, it's like, again, that's where you got immersed in the culture again. I think what I came away with is how cheap life is in a third world country. I just, you would have someone hit by a car in your neighborhood, and it would just be the world's worst thing. I mean, people never even slow down to look. I mean, it's just, Here's a person hit by a bus laying on the side of the road. Maybe their mother is shedding some tears. That's it. You know, takes sometimes a day for authorities to, you know, show up and do anything about it. And the bedlam and the traffic, there are, you know, the guy with the biggest and loudest horn, he got right away. That's all there is to it. And we were in Benoit a lot. I spent a lot of time in there. During the day, our goals were, this was an off-limit area. So as military vehicles are moving through, they were not allowed to stop. And they knew this. So, you know, you have supplies, you have all the different, you know, you have a lot of military trucks moving around. And our job was to make sure they kept moving. And many of them tried to make friends with the local females, and there was a lot of that. That was a lot of our job. But again, this was a very dangerous area. And, you know, it was very heavily VC. And you wouldn't know a VC, I mean, I wouldn't know one. And that was the scary part of it. You didn't know who your enemy was. And I'm sure you've heard that before. You didn't know who they were. And so you had to assume everyone was. Or you didn't assume they were, because a lot of the people were very friendly and very nice. Mm-hmm. So again, we rode the countryside, just making sure that the military personnel was moving through and were where they were supposed to be.
Okay. Now, did you go in there at night, or did
Yes.
you just get out?
We had night patrols as well. And on the night patrol, you were primarily sweeping the red light district and catching many, many military people. And again, this is a very, very dangerous area. We, as individuals, I carried a M79 grenade launcher with a what they call a shotgun shell in it, not a grenade, but it was, I mean, the thing is like that, and it slides in there, and that would, you know, you could wipe out a whole alley with that thing. That's what I personally carried, along with a sidearm. And we had many, you know, we were heavily armed, and we would go in and just kick doors in and drag GIs out of there. And sometimes arrest them. Depends on how far away they were from their unit, how, you know, if they were AWOL or something like that, we were bound to do something about it. But if they were just a guy making a mistake, generally we put them back in their truck and told them that, be thankful and get on your way. Worst thing you could probably do to a guy was take him and get his first sergeant out of bed and make him sign for him, not the duty officer, but the first sergeant has to sign for him. Oh, that guy, you never saw him down there again. But that's the guy that spits on you while you're dragging him out or something, so you have a vendetta, so you make sure. But the paperwork was ridiculous if you did arrest someone, so most of the time we just turned them into their first sergeant and let him handle the situation.
Okay. Now, would this sometimes get violent? Would they
Oh,
fight
yes.
back? Yeah.
Oh, quite often. Quite often it would get violent. Because remember, they're armed as well. I mean, they all have, if nothing else, an M16 with them. We would always identify ourselves as, you know, MPs, so they wouldn't think it was VC or something coming after them. But it was, I guess unless you've been there, you can't imagine the quality of the homes and such. I mean, you could kick a door in with your fist. I mean, it was just nothing to it. And these were red light districts that were just thrown up just simply for that purpose.
How would you know where to look? You just go everywhere?
We knew, you know, we knew. And interestingly enough, many of the red light district, there was one right outside the 101st Airborne's main camp at Benoit. And it was there were many, many VC there that we didn't even know about because they were all in tunnels. And their goal was to break into a prisoner of war camp, which was just down the road. And it was discovered prior to them ready to make their attack. And an airstrike was called in on that area, and there was nothing left after they got done with it. But that was about a week after I left. I heard about it from others that contacted me. Did you know? Type of thing. And oh gosh, no, because we would sit there and drink a Coke, and it was a common stopping area. So,
Now, did some of the MPs in your unit get hurt in that process, or?
no, we never lost any MPs in my group, my area. We also patrolled with QCs, which were Vietnamese Army military police. They did all the interpreting, they did all the talking. And they dealt with most of the situations, if it had to do with the Vietnamese, and we dealt with the American situation. But luckily, I mean, very simply, we could have, but it just didn't happen.
Okay. Now, could these Vietnamese MPs, could they speak any English, or?
They did a pretty good job, actually. I was surprised that, you could understand what they were trying to tell you, and they got better as time went on.
What general impression did you have of them as soldiers or people or allies or whatever?
That this was their job. If they weren't doing this, they would probably be plowing a rice paddy somewhere. And oftentimes they didn't show up. Well, where's home? He went home. Where's home? Saigon or wherever. And he'll be back when he feels like it. So, yeah, their discipline was pretty lax.
All right. Now, did you have any trouble from the VC, or did they just leave you alone because in a way you were being useful by cleaning the Americans out?
Well, we didn't have any direct contact with the VC, but they were there. And again, you as a soldier wouldn't know one from another. It's not like they wore their black pajamas and walked down the street.
Right.
They would mix in with the populace very nicely. But we didn't have any direct contact with them, but they were there. I mean, we were very minor. They wouldn't be going for us per se, because that would tip their hand that they were there. They had much bigger goals in mind, like breaking into this prisoner of war camp, which had a lot of Vietnamese prisoners of war in it, a lot of VC, a lot of MBA. And that was handled by the Vietnamese. We had nothing to do with that. That was a Vietnamese prison. And that was their, that's where they were headed until they were found out, and it was stopped.
Right. Now, while you were there, how much of a sense did you have of what the larger purpose of being in Vietnam was? Did you have much of an understanding of why you were there, or was it just someplace they sent you?
I was there probably out of patriotism, not wanting to go to prison, wanting to do my family proud, but I did not understand what our role, what our purpose was one bit. And I take a lot of those same things to the Iraq, Afghanistan situation that we have now, which is a whole nother program, I'm sure. But I, as a Vietnam veteran and a person who did, experience, I don't understand what our role is there as well. I think it's wrong. I think it's being run by the military. One of the things I came away with was this was a war for the high-ranking individuals. This war that we had in Vietnam, they lived like kings. They lived in chateaus. And these were beautiful buildings in Saigon. I had reason to go there and see them as part of duties. I'd bring papers back and forth and this type of thing, only in the day. And I did make a few trips at night, but and I go, whoa, this is where so-and-so, this is nice. I mean, and they had just I forget the term, but there's a French-Vietnamese mix of blood, and they were absolutely beautiful women. I mean, they were just, the Vietnamese themselves can be very pretty, but there is a term for that blood mix, and I don't know, I can't remember what it is, but they were just beautiful women, just stunningly gorgeous. And many of them working there, and I think, what? This man is in no danger, and I just felt that, wait a minute, he can't possibly know the experience of what's going on with these guys at fire bases and things like this, which I consider myself very, very fortunate. I never was in that part of like fire bases, and I saw them, I visited them, but I didn't have to live there. It was, that was very, I lost friends there, schoolmates that were, in those situations.
They went and they didn't come back.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, did you talk at all about any of this with men that you were serving with, or did you just kind of keep all that to yourself?
No, I didn't, and I don't know of any conversations to that effect. It was, you got off duty, you started drinking beer. And beer was, the beverage of choice because you didn't drink the water. And we always had beer. And we were very fortunate. I lived on Long Binh, so we had electricity. We had, we actually had the only flush toilets on the whole facility. It was that people would come over to see it. I mean, wow, porcelain. I mean, this was amazing. I don't know why we had it, but we did. So actually, I'm very fortunate. My duty was not that awful.
Okay. You mentioned sort of in passing, you have a variety of things that you wound up doing on road patrol besides sort of the basic. There's the basic road patrol stuff where you're keeping the convoys moving during the day and you're flushing out the AWOLs and so forth at night out of the red light districts. What other kinds of things did you do while you
We were also assigned to, for security of the incoming airplanes, that were going to the 90th replacement depot. And this was sometimes 2 or 3 full-size airplanes an evening. And the buses, there would be about 4 or 5 buses. We'd put a gun jeep ahead, in the middle, and behind during the day as well as at night. At night being a little riskier. And we would go up onto the airplane, explain who we were, where we were, what's going on. And that we're going to load load the buses, and there could be a hostile action, and so if in the event, hit the floor, and the bus drivers knew to step on it, as well as the jeeps would take off as well. The jeeps were armed with grenade launchers, M60 machine guns, and assorted M16s as we needed them, and we would assign 3 jeeps to convoy duty, we call it. It was convoy duty. It was basically running them so then we had to then bring a convoy back to load the airplane, because the airplane was not wasted. It was refueled and taken off again with people returning to the United States.
Okay. Now, did you ever have occasions where anybody took a shot at you?
We did have some occasional sniper, and probably one of the dirty tricks we used to play on people was we told them that if you see a flare, hit the floor. Well, of course, on nights we knew that it wasn't particularly busy, we would pop a flare and we called it assholes and elbows, because that's all you'd see on the bus. And we'd always get a kick out of that, just shoot a parachute flare and watch everybody dive for the floor. But we were at high speeds, moving as quickly as we could to get through. But it could very easily have been, we didn't ever lose a convoy, strictly because I think any type of activity by the VC or Viet Cong or the NBA would have been, the reactionary force that would have come out of Long Binh would have been overwhelmed them, because it was a very large force.
Yeah. And this was after the Tet Offensive, where the VC come out in large numbers, and after that, they weren't necessarily
Not
as
really.
aggressive
Yeah,
in the
you're
same
correct.
way.
Yes, there were more just cells, to use a term from today's type of fighting that they have. Just groups of people that were probably farmers during the day, and at night they were soldiers, and you didn't know the difference.
All right. And you also had occasion to go over to the headquarters and that kind of thing.
Yes, I can remember vividly one night as I got later on and close to the end of my duty, I had higher rank, or time and country they called it, than some. So I was given command of the Jeep, because I knew how to react to different things, and or a best reaction to different things. And I was given some real idiots to take care of. I can remember vividly one night, this guy had his master's degree in finance. So what he was doing as an MP, I do not know. It was just but he couldn't figure out how the bullet got in the chamber of his gun. And he would sit on this bunk. It's just mechanical things didn't, I don't know, I just couldn't understand it. So he was my gunner one night, which I didn't like, but halfway through the night, we got a radio call that there had been some activity, and so I told him to go ahead and load the 60. He didn't have any bullets with him. He had forgot to check out the ammo. And I guess my fault for not checking on him, but I figured if you get the gun, you get the bullets. But I mean, things like that just didn't click with him. You need bullets if you got a gun. Though it's just, I don't know why I remember that. I also remember every time we turned a corner, his steel helmet would fall off, so he'd have to stop and run back and get that. He just was a goof that didn't belong there. But I don't know why I digress into that story. I don't know where I was going. Please ask the question again.
All right. Well, I was basically just asking about the different kinds of duties that you had, and you had mentioned sort of making runs over to the headquarters and that kind of thing.
Okay. Yes, I can remember one night we were called to. It was a trailer. It was very nice, for the 1960s. It was a nice trailer that a high-ranking officer had to get a package to Saigon. Well, this is that night, and Highway 1, it was called. Pretty sure that's what it was. And, I mean, this just wasn't wise to be running down Highway 1 at night, especially as a single Jeep. Well, it turned out it was some ladies that had to go back to Saigon. And that was we were to follow the staff car, or go ahead of the staff car, and provide security for some ladies that were at a party that this high-ranking officer, I don't know who he was or what he was, but, and I thought, well, wait a minute, this was scary stuff. And, that was the fastest trip ever to Saigon. I mean, we just went, but you couldn't turn your headlights on. You had to use your small lights on a Jeep, and it's only because I'd been down the road several times. Plus you have, every time you go over a bridge, there would be security on a bridge that, and those were usually South Vietnamese soldiers. So, of course, they're sleeping or whatever, but I just thought, well, this isn't worth sacrificing myself for, but it was an order, and I did it, and thankfully was not harmed in any way. So.
Did you ever challenge any of the orders you got,
No.
or did you just take them?
No, just took them. Figured out the best way to do them without getting hurt.
Okay. Are there other, and so basically you were basically on the road patrol duty and connected things until the end of your time in country, or did you have any other assignment after that?
No, that was it. I was, as you get close to the end of your, you know your time when you're leaving. You know it very well. You've got countdown calendars on your locker and everything else, so you're very aware of when you're going to leave. And my orders actually came a few days early, and so I was able to get out of country a little bit earlier.
Okay. Now, are there other sort of individual incidents or particular memories about the time you spent in Vietnam that tend to come back to you a lot that you haven't brought in here yet?
Different things pop into my head with smells. I don't know how popular or how often that comes up, but when I smell a freshly oiled road, a dry, dusty road that they put I don't know what they use to put on it, but it smells oily or petroleum. That gives me almost flashbacks, because that was a constant smell in the air, because as much traffic as we had around Long Binh and in different areas, they were all constantly putting oil on the roads. That is a smell that just almost brings me right back there. You don't smell this too often, but there was always the constant in the air of burning, waste, human waste. That was constant. That was always in the air. And now, yeah, the chances of coming up with that smell in Grand Rapids is pretty nil, but just diesel fuel burning, which is what it was. They used diesel fuel for the most part, and it will bring back, and not flashback to an individual incident, but just memories that maybe you've forgotten, good or bad.
Okay. Now, when you were going through the town and that kind of thing, would there be other things like cooking smells or other stuff like that, or?
All I ever smelled was the sewage, because they have no sanitary system in those towns. And so that was always in the air. I do remember, I mean, when I worked at night, we'd always park behind this French bakery. And when his breads would start cooking, oh, it was wonderful. And we would always time it just right, so we'd show up when the bread was coming out of the oven. And it was absolutely delicious, that French bread just freshly made. And they would always give us a few loaves for parking there, so no one would bother them, because we'd park in the alley behind their house, or behind their bakery or their business, and wait for the bread to get done. That was just a place where we stopped. But
Did you ever learn any Vietnamese while you were there?
just enough to tell someone to stop. I remember the term dinky Dow is crazy, and very little. I wasn't interested. It didn't interest me. I mean, the people themselves are wonderful people. I didn't get into their homes. I didn't get to know any of the people because I lived elsewhere. But we got into their homes if we were chasing GIs, because if the GIs were living there, somebody would rat on them, and we'd go in and find them. Because these guys were deserters that had families, and they lived there, and we'd have to, our job was to catch them and put them in the system. Whatever happened to them, I don't know. I'm sure, I mean, I know there's GIs still living there somewhere. And I'm sure there are many of them, even then in '68, in '69, were part of the economy, were part of the village. But they were American soldiers that just left. That's it, I'm done. And but to this day, there are some. They talk about MIAs, but maybe not. Maybe they know, maybe they're there.
Yeah, not sure exactly what the communists would have done with them when they took over.
Well, that could have been a problem. I don't know. But if they were Vietnamese enough, who knows? Yeah.
Hard to tell. All right. So you get to the end of the tour. Now then, how do they get you back? Do you just go straight back to the States at that point? Or what
you go back to the 90th Replacement Depot. Little sidelight, I had, you turn in your papers that put me on a plane, I'm going to muster out, and you give away just about everything that you have, because you want to travel light, you want to travel quick, and you don't want to ever see a green pair of shirts and pants again. But I had, the fellow I turned my paperwork in to at the 90th Replacement Depot, I had arrested him at one point in time in the city of Benoit. And he kind of lost my paperwork for a couple days. So I actually stayed there longer than I should have. And I was sent back for a haircut, of all things. I'm going to get out. And I was sent to go get a haircut because my hair was too long, which no longer than it was just harassment. And finally I got out. I was put on an airplane. We flew to San Francisco, and was mustered out. I was handed my final paycheck on the 4th of July, 1969. And I found my way home from there. I flew all night. I just want to get going.
Now, was this a point when they told you to get out of your uniform, or did you go home in your uniform? Or?
I was in a uniform. Actually, one of the scariest times we had, as far as being injured, was the bus ride from the airport, wherever we landed, which I don't remember where, to the mustering out depot, which was in San Francisco or San Diego, or San Francisco. The bus we were on, which was an old bus, lost a tire, or the tire had separated. How they come apart, you see them on the highway. And a big chunk of rubber came up through the floor and smacked this guy who's sitting right behind me in the head, and he was really hurt. He was very, very, he was injured, and it could have been me. So, I mean, that would have been my luck, but I remember we had to get an ambulance there. The driver pulled over and got an ambulance and got the guy taken care of. But that was as close to being hurt as I had been the whole time.
But you didn't encounter any protesters or things like that?
We offloaded and stood on the side of the highway, and we stood on the side of this highway in our jungle fatigues. So we were still wearing our jungle fatigues, and you could tell. I mean, most of them were dirty because you didn't wash them regularly, and we did have some things called at us. As we stood on the side of the road trying to assess the situation and get this fellow some help. There were some medics on the bus, so they took care of things until help arrived. But I do remember that there were some things yelled at us. I don't remember exactly what they were, but they weren't kind. Mm-hmm. And then when I was mustered out, I was in the airports at midnight to late morning, so I didn't really encounter huge crowds. And then I never wore my uniform again after that. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really have a problem.
So the protesters worked the day shift?
It must be, or they weren't on holiday weekend, because it was the 4th of July weekend, so maybe that was it.
All right. Well, okay, once you got back home, what did you do?
I think it was the 4th of July weekend, so I arrived home on the 5th of July. And of course we had a family gathering at the home, and my mother, of course, put a big meal out. And I remember using way too many expletives, and my father taking me aside in the other room, and you got to clean it up. I don't know why. It just, oh, that's right, I'm home, because I was used to different. Mm-hmm. So he says, clean it up. And he said, I don't care how you talk out of here, but not at the dinner table. And then the next work day, I remember laying in my bed in my bedroom, which I was home in my own bed in my own bedroom, and my dad saying, come on, time to go to work. I didn't even have a day off. My dad, and we had to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning. We were there at 8 o'clock in the morning. He got me up and took me. I think he wanted to tell everybody his son was home, but mm-hmm. So it was the family business, and I assimilated myself into the family business quite gladly. I mean, just thrilled to be able to do what I guess was my heritage at the time. And I went back to school. I went back to junior college, and and after the things I'd done and the places I'd been, I thought, wait a minute, this isn't. It wasn't the education so much. It was just the attitude of the people, of the students, not the professors, but the students. That the trivialness of what they were excited about, I couldn't get into it. I just thought, well, wait a minute. There's so much more, and I just. Although I had loved college life, 2 years later and all the things I'd done and seen, it wasn't for me. So I found myself not going to school and staying at work that much more, and really enjoying the family business and growing with it. And subsequently, I never went back to school. I never got my degree.
Aside from the part where it kind of changed how you viewed college, how else do you think that time in the service affected you? In what ways were you different from maybe when you went in?
Certainly more serious. But yet I don't think I was a changed individual. I think I just looked at things with less of a Peter Pan attitude, and this is Grand Rapids, nothing happens here in Grand Rapids. And knowing that, I was very happy to be in a place, and how fortunate I was to grow up in a place like I have, because I'd seen the other side and I didn't like it. I did enjoy travel. I enjoyed moving around. I enjoyed seeing this country, not the world. I haven't done a lot of traveling, but at that time I enjoyed just moving around and seeing the country.
So you gained some knowledge and some experience more than anything
Correct.
else.
Yes, life experience that certainly was never going to be gathered, at JC or it was just life experience.
Now, would you talk to people at all about what you saw and did in Vietnam?
Very little. I would talk to other veterans. But again, to me, if you hadn't been there, you couldn't relate. And there were terms, and in your studies, you've probably come across them, and one of the terms doesn't mean nothing, don't mean nothing. Well, that was a very common statement, don't mean nothing. Well, if I said that to someone who hadn't been in the military, hadn't been in Vietnam, they wouldn't know what I was talking about. I have a good friend who I still see regularly. He's from Grand Rapids. He was in the infantry, and he saw a lot of action, and fortunately he's fine. He's got a very big job and a very good friend, but he and I will occasionally talk. And he visited me one time when I was in Vietnam, and that day I had guard duty in the hospital, which was a psychiatric ward that people were in, but they were prisoners, so they had to be guarded. Well, his company was moving, or his division was coming through Benoit. He had my address, so he came to look me up. And he walked into a psychiatric ward with grenades, a bandolier, a sidearm, which the eyes on these people that were mentally ill, as well as the prisoners, just like saucers when they saw that, because if one of them had gotten a hold of any one of those weapons, I don't know what would have happened. It would have been ugly, because they would kill without thinking about it. Oh, I shoved him out the door. We had a wonderful visit, but I shoved him out the door physically. I said, "Oh my God, you don't bring weapons in a psychiatric ward." "Oh, is that where I'm at?" He didn't know, and but I can still remember the reaction on the face of the prisoners and the other patients. Like, "Oh my, look at these! If I could get my hands on those, I could kill everybody here. That would be wonderful." He and I discussed things a little bit. But again, his experience was a whole lot different than mine. He had some really harrowing experiences. I think it was in the Way area and up north in the Highlands. Yep. So yeah, he's seen a lot more things than I did.
Did you have, once you got back from Vietnam, you're back in sort of basically regular life, would you follow the news or pay attention to what was still happening in Vietnam, or did you tune that stuff out?
Not that much. Oddly enough, not that much. I married, I got home in July, I got married in September to my high school sweetheart, if you will. So I was getting on with my life as quickly as I possibly could, in my eyes. And that was my focus at that time. I followed the fall of Saigon. I thought that was interesting. But not surprising by any means.
And did you pay much attention to the anti-war movement or that kind of stuff going on?
Not really.
The other events you had sort of the My Lai stuff and
the My Lai thing I did follow, Lieutenant Cowley and the My Lai. Basically, I consider him a scapegoat. I'm sure there were far more incidences, probably a lot worse. But that was the one that got reported and got in the news. Highlight things like that, the fall of Saigon, My Lai, those type of things I did follow. But the everyday anti-war movement and the race movement, I wasn't that involved in. I I certainly wasn't involved in it, but I didn't take pay a lot of attention to it.
Right. Did you have a sense that Vietnam veterans were they not treated the way they should have been when they got back, or did you not really even think about that particularly one way or another?
I never had and I'm sure it happened, I never had the actual protester ever get in my face. I never had anyone not thank me for my service or call me a name of any sort, directly to my face. So it wasn't anything that was a priority for me to take a notice of. I just felt somewhat cheated out of 2 years of my life because all my friends were now graduating with bachelor's degrees and moving on to to their careers and some going higher. But I was happy with getting involved in the family business, which degree would have made no difference there. I had the bloodline, so. Right.
That kind of worked out for you.
Yeah. Well, yes and no, but I was trying my very best to live as normal a life as, and to my own children, I've not spoke much of. They ask me questions, I answer them, but I don't elaborate. And I guess only if I was with another guard who experienced what I did, or another road patrolman who experienced what I did, would any of it make any sense to them, because unless you were there, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, we'll see. But actually, the fact of the matter is, you told us quite a bit here that, at least from the perspective of the outsider, is going to fill in a lot of parts of things, and will make at least a certain level of sense. Not being able to fully understand what it was like to be there,
Right.
but at least to get a better idea of some other parts of what was going on. So in that sense, I think unless you've got something else you want to put on the record here before we close out, I think we're pretty good.
No, I think I've done a lot of talking here. I appreciate this opportunity, and I hope this does become a record somewhere, someplace, which you said it will, so I'm sure it will. So kind of glad I went to the thank you thing Hello Michigan, and signed up for your interview. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. At that point, we just switch.